Morning everyone, I'm Janet Hughes, I'm the Programme Director for Gov.uk Verify, and I'm really proud and excited to be here today on behalf of this unprecedented experiment, as Don described it. I'm going to talk to you about Verify, which is the new way to protect users from identity theft. As we put more services online and we make it possible for people to do more things in an automated, real-time way, it becomes increasingly important that we can actually trust the users are who they say they are and protect them from the loss of data and services through identity fraud. So we've built a new way to do this because the existing ways that were available at the time we realised we had this need couldn't verify people to a high enough degree of confidence. Verify is, for the first time in the world, provides a high level of assurance through an entirely online process that the user really is who they say they are. So I'm going to talk to you about three things today. I'm going to focus on the last one. But for those who are not yet familiar with Verify, I'm going to talk to you a bit about how it works, just so that you've all got the same starting point. I'm going to give you a quick progress update, and then I'm going to dwell in a bit more detail on our market-based approach and why we're taking this unusual approach to delivering Verify in the UK, of the government not building it itself, but instead users choosing from a range of certified companies. So, first of all, how it works. The clicker is not working. There we go. How it works is you verify your identity once, and it takes about 15 minutes, and then you can use your account that you've set up to access many services. That's the basic proposition at the heart of Verify. There's already 8 services in public beta using gov.uk Verify, so if you want to give it a go, then find one of these services online and you can have a go yourself. Who here has done that already? Oh, good for you. Excellent. That's becoming a thing. So there are 8 here, including filing your self-assessment return, which is going to become important in the next couple of months for lots of people, viewing your driving licence, claiming a rural payment, universal credit, still at quite a small scale, but getting ready to scale up. 8 already, and another 20 in the next year, and there are actually 50 government services in our pipeline waiting to adopt Verify. So what you do is, let's say I've been made redundant because my company's gone insolvent. So I can use this new online service that's been made by the Redundancy Payment Service, and I can choose how I want to access that service. I can either just access it straightforwardly online, in which case I won't be able to save and return to my form that I'm filling in, and it will take at least a week longer because they don't know who I am, so they're going to have to carry out extra checks to establish who I am. Or I can use Verify and do the whole thing right now. So lots of people choose to do that, and when you do, you press the green button and you come to Verify. And the way it works is you choose from one of these 4 certified companies, 4 at the moment, more to come, as I'll mention shortly. But at the moment, you can choose from Experian, the Post Office, Verizon, or Dig Identity. And what we do here is ask you some questions to help you choose which one of them is likely to work for you. Because the way this works is, rather than us specifying the solution and asking them to deliver it, we're specifying the standards, and each of these companies uses different methods to achieve the same standards. So, the questions you get asked are things like, what types of identity document do you have? Do you have a UK passport or a passport from somewhere else in the world? Do you have a UK photocard driving licence? Do you have a mobile phone, and can you install apps on it? And depending on your answers to these types of questions, some of the providers will be able to work for you and some of them won't. So in this example, I've said I've got a non-UK passport, so Dig Identity and Post Office can validate those documents. But if I'd answered differently, very important for me to say, if I'd answered differently, a different ordering would have appeared here. Other providers are available. So let's say I did choose one of those other providers and it was Experian. I'm going to take this off because it's rattling against my microphone. What happens now is I go through a process with Experian and they will ask me some questions and ask me for some evidence to prove that I am who I say I am. And each of the companies, as I've said, uses a different way to do this, and they all have to achieve these 5 things. The first 2 concern ensuring the identity really exists, and there's such a person as Janet Hughes. That's elements A and B. The second aspect of this is asserting that it's really me actually on the device or at the keyboard. So there's not only such a thing as Janet Hughes, but it really is me at this time. Element D is that there's no record of this identity being known to be either dead or fraudulent. And element E is that the identity has been active over time, so it hasn't just been fabricated just now using documents stolen some time ago. And only when they've achieved all 5 of these things to the right level of confidence can a company say, yes, yes, government department, you can trust that this person is who they say they are. So let's say they've done that in my case. I'm accessing the View driving license service. The DVLA now has received my name, address, and date of birth, and my gender, if I've chosen to provide it, and they're looking for me in their records. And they can ask me an extra question if they like to make sure that they've got the right record, so they might ask me for my driver license number, and there is my driving record. For your information, I've covered up my date of birth. I'm afraid I'm beyond the age where I'm prepared to share that. And I'm not showing my record, but there are no points on it, so I'd just like you to know. So that takes me about 10 minutes, or 15 on average. The next time I want to use a service, any of those ones in that list that I showed you, I just turn up, say I've used Verify before, choose the company that I used, and in the interest of equality, I've chosen a different one this time. This is the post office, and sign in using my username and password and a second factor, something like either an SMS or a code that I've generated on my phone or on my landline for people who don't have a mobile phone. And that takes about a minute. So that's how it works. Quick progress update then on our delivery of this exciting experiment. This is where we are in terms of the volume of our users. We update this every week, so if you're interested in following our progress, then you can have a look at the performance platform on gov.uk, and every week you can see how many people have been verified. So far, over 300,000 people, identities have been verified using gov.uk. We've had more sign-ins than that though, because we're already seeing that people who verified do return and sign in more than once. We're in beta right now. And what that means is, we've been in beta since October last year. What that means is we're still rapidly developing the service in response to feedback from users. This is a difficult thing to do. That's why no one else has ever done it before. So it's taking us some time to iterate it and improve it and make sure it works for everybody. By April next year, though, we'll be live. And what that means is we'll be able to cover 90% of the population, we'll have a 90% success rate, we'll be scaled and ready to take any demands that any government service can throw at us, and we'll have a wider range of certified companies available for people to use. That will be April 2016, and if you're interested in following our progress on that, take a look at our blog where we publish regular updates about where we're up to and what's going on. So now the kind of main meat of what I want to talk about today, which is our market-based approach. Why we're doing that, and how we're doing that. So what we're doing here is not just building a service. That's what makes Verify such an exciting project to work on, and that's why we're here talking to old friends and new today about it. It's not just a product or service. What we're really trying to do here is create a new market of identity services, not just in the UK either, but globally. And we're doing that for 4 main reasons. The first one is really important for users, which is that they get a choice. So instead of government choosing a provider, concealing the fact they've done that and presenting the service to users, the user gets to choose which provider they want to use, who do they trust, and they can choose to move between providers if they want, or have several different providers. So I've shown you the 4 that we have already, and there are 5 more which have signed contracts with us earlier this year in March, and they are Barclays, PayPal, Morpho, GB Group, and Royal Mail. Those are the extra 5 that are due to come and join Verify between now and when we go live in April. So by then we'll have 9 different providers for people to choose from. It's also better for user privacy. So in Verify, when you choose your certified company, they don't know which service you're trying to access, and the service you're trying to access doesn't know which certified company you've used, and only the minimum amount of data needed ever passes around between those different components in the system. And the hub is completely agnostic. That's just managing communication between those 2 things and acting as a privacy barrier. So that protects people's privacy because it means you can't track an individual across the whole of government. There's no big central database. There's no single identifier for a person. We've also built Verify to meet these identity assurance principles. So we've got an independent group chaired by Edgar, who you're going to be hearing from later, who advise us on how we can make sure Verify really has user privacy and consumer interests at its heart. So these principles include the legal requirements under data protection law, so things like data minimization are familiar concepts for people who know about data protection. But it goes beyond that in the sense that it talks about users being in control of what's happening to their data, users having a choice, having a multiplicity of providers for users to choose from, having a way for users to resolve disputes, making it possible for users to move between providers. And this group was established before we wrote a single line of code in Verify, and it still exists now. We work very closely with that group to ensure that everything we're doing puts privacy at the heart of this process. This is the one I think you're probably going to be most interested in here today, though. We've made this decision to take a market-based approach because we're in this context of a very rapidly developing market and very rapidly developing threats. So here's an example of a threat which is highly industrialized and automated and went undetected in the United States for several months. There have been lots of high-profile cases of data loss and identity fraud recently. This one you may not have come across because it was over the pond and didn't affect so many people, but it's very important to us. What happened is the IRS made a download your tax transcript service available online, and you could go online and download your tax records. And they protected it by asking users 3 knowledge-based questions based on their credit reference agency file. So just one of those elements that I described earlier was covered by this. And there was no security around it, and that's really important for us to note today. It's not just about identity. You need all sorts of other security measures in place to protect your service. They didn't do that effectively here, and what happened was some hackers had a go at 600,000 of these accounts over a 2 or 3 month period, and their success rate was 50%. In 50% of cases, they successfully accessed other people's tax records. And the fraud that's committed there doesn't happen in that service. That's why they didn't notice it. What happens is the hackers take the data and they use it to commit fraud against other services. So in any sector as well, not just in the public sector. So they can claim a tax refund fraudulently using that data. They may even be able to set up financial products using that data. So that explains how quickly these threats are developing and how they affect not just central government, but all sectors in the whole economy. So we all need to work together to solve this problem in a market-based approach, not just government trying to build its own answer. So that's how the threats are developing. Let's have a look at how the market's developing. This is a way of mapping out, if you're a company, your strategy in relation to the rest of the market. It's developed by Simon Wardley, rather brilliant strategist. If you're not familiar with him, I urge you to look him up. I've slightly tweaked this because I'm using it to map the whole market as represented by the Verify identity providers. So along the bottom is the evolution of products and services. So they start out being invented and they move through becoming custom built and products and then into utility. And up the side is the visibility of the value chain to users. So things at the top, more visible to users. In October last year, when we went into public beta, each of these blobs represents one of those 5 elements that I mentioned. And when we went into public beta last year, there was one method to achieve each of those elements. And there was actually only one provider, but even in the months that followed, they were using a very small range of different methods and data sources, most of which were custom built or adopted from other sectors in a custom built kind of way. So that's what it looked like in October last year. By October this year, things have already changed quite significantly. So those things which were being invented and custom built last year have become products and are being rented and sold within the market. New things have been invented, more things are coming downstream, which we'll see in the next few months, and we're beginning to see a bit of diversity in each of these elements. So there are a wider range of different types of data sources and methods, and a bit of competition now between different versions of the same type of method. So that's where we are roughly now, and this is where we expect to get to. A really diverse, competitive, vibrant market. Why is that a good thing? Because what we'll see here is innovation happening in a very rapid way, and we're facilitating it rather than getting it in the way or ignoring it, which is what we normally like to do in government. And we'll see competition and improvement. So we'll see better services for users, lower costs for providers, and eventually lower costs for government. If we had procured a solution, which is the traditional way of doing things in government, or decided to build it ourselves based on our understanding of the market last October, it would already be out of date and it would very soon be completely obsolete. So for that reason alone, we think a market-based approach is better than government doing it itself, or getting one single provider or consortium to do it, because you still don't get those effects in that scenario. The final reason why we think a market-based approach is better is because we're not just going to be able to meet government needs by doing what we're doing here. This is a problem which, as you know, because you're all here, affects much wider set of interests than just government services, the rest of the public sector and the rest of the private sector as well. So in 2014, this is criminal cases of fraud. 41% of all fraud was identity fraud in that year, according to CIFAS, and 84% of identity fraud took place online, according to those figures. So this is a huge and increasing problem, not just affecting central government, but affecting all of the online commerce and sectors. And the cost of identity services in the UK, when we were last here, a year and a half ago, at the last one of these conferences, we learned that the cost is 3.3 billion of verifying people's identity in the UK, and Federated approaches like Verify could reduce that by 90%, not to 90%, by 90%, because we're building capabilities which can be reused across the whole of the public and private sectors instead of just building something bespoke for government. This standard-based approach means that, for example, know your customer anti-money laundering regulation requirements are met by the standards that we work to. So those are the reasons why we think a market-based approach is better. But we're not just sitting here saying, well, that's good then. What we're doing is trying to stimulate the market, and we're trying to make sure that we get to this point as quickly and rapidly as we possibly can of a diverse, competitive market. So we're doing these 4 things. First of all, we're setting standards. And we're setting standards in the UK, which you probably know about. This is Good Practice Guide 45, which sets out those elements that I mentioned earlier, and all sorts of other guidance as to how identity proofing and verification should happen. And there are various other good practice guides too, which do the same thing. But that's just going to help us in the UK set the rules of the game, and that's not really good enough because, as we know, this is an international, global situation. So we're also working in Europe on the EID regulation, and we're going to hear a lot more about Europe in one of the sessions later this morning. But we've been leading the way trying to negotiate the standards that fall behind this to make sure that what we've done in the UK is going to be interoperable with the rest of Europe so that we can help create a European-wide market, not just one in the UK that's special to us. And even beyond that, we've been working with ISO to try and help make sure that the international standards also interoperate with those of Europe and those of the UK. And we work with our colleagues in the States and in other countries on an ongoing basis to try and achieve that, so that for once we can establish the size of the rail tracks before we start building them, and we can all build to the same set of rail tracks and the same set of rules. And that's really important for stimulating growth in this market, we think. The second thing we're doing is aggregating demand. So for each of these services, they could have gone to the market with their particular set of demand at different times to try and stimulate investment. And that might have worked over time, but we think it's much more likely to happen quickly if we all go to the market together as the whole of government and say, here's the demand for the whole of government over the next 4 or 5 years, and this is what we want to buy against. And that de-risks the investment for our identity providers and for the suppliers working into them, because it makes it a much less risky proposition that at least some of those plans will come to fruition. We're managing the commercial framework in a related point, so that instead of each provider having to negotiate separately with each government department in a slightly separate, different specification and slightly different rules of the game, they can just come and talk to us, and we can talk to them and negotiate on behalf of the whole of the government. So we did that with our European Journal notice and our procurement earlier this year, and that's how we ended up with the 9 providers we now have on our framework, because there's one set of rules for the whole of government instead of a whole different set for each department. And finally, we're developing sources of supply. This bit I'm really excited about. We're going to be hearing some more about some of this today. It's going to be really good to hear from Ronan speaking next about this. What we want to do is increase the demographic coverage of Verify collectively as a whole, and make it easier for people to verify by having lots of different ways and lots of different paths through for different people, so that for any individual, there'll be a path through that's straightforward and works for them. So we're doing that by working with the Open Identity Exchange and with partners in industry to try to get mobile phone data available, and we'll be hearing about that later on today, to try and get charity data available and try and get bank account data available. But we're doing all of this on the basis of those principles that I mentioned earlier, so that we can all be confident that we're doing this in a way that respects users' privacy and protects it and enhances it and enhances their security, so that we can ensure that all the people taking part in these programs that we're involved in are actually confident that they're not going to fall foul of those expectations. So that's our market-based approach and why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And that brings me to the end of my speaking notes today. But I want to say there isn't time for questions today, which I'm sad about. So please do follow us on Twitter and ask questions there. Follow me personally on Twitter and ask me questions there. I'm always really happy to talk to people or answer questions on the blog. We certainly don't think we know everything in the Identity Assurance Programme. We absolutely don't. And we rely on participation from all of you and questions and help from all of you. So please don't be backwards in coming forwards in checking us out and getting involved. Thank you.